The wedding day, a moment of joy, of unity, of promises meant to last a lifetime. A celebration where laughter fills the air, where love is sealed in vows, and where the future is painted in hues of hope. But for Tyrek Burton, the future never came. Just 7 hours after he placed a ring on his bride's finger, his world was shattered. A single moment, a single encounter, a single gunshot, in front of his wife, in front of his daughter, in front of those who had just witnessed his happiest day. A groom turned victim, a celebration turned crime scene, and the most chilling part, the man who pulled the trigger was a stranger. What happened in those final moments? What dark twist of fate led a father of four to his tragic end? Stay with me as we uncover the disturbing details behind this shocking case. Tyrek Burton was not a man of extravagance. He did not chase fleeting riches or seek attention in the way some do. Instead, his wealth was measured in the laughter of his children, the quiet strength of his love, and the unwavering loyalty he held for those closest to him. He was 37 years old, a man who had spent years laying the foundation for a future he believed in. To those who knew him, Tyrek was steady, reliable, and deeply devoted to his family. A father of four, his world revolved around his children, each of whom carried a piece of his heart. He was their protector, their guide, their source of wisdom in a world that often felt unsteady. And then there was her. She had been there from the beginning, the woman he had loved for 13 years, a bond that had weathered time, challenges, and uncertainty. Through every hardship, through every triumph, she was there. And after more than a decade together, after waiting far longer than most, the day had finally arrived, the day he would call her his wife. It had been a simple ceremony. No elaborate displays, no lavish excess, just family, just love, just the life they had always wanted, sealed with a promise that was never meant to be broken. But to understand the tragedy that unfolded on that fateful night, one must first understand the man. Tyrek was raised in Greensboro, North Carolina, a city known for its history, its culture, its tightly woven communities. It was here, in the quiet streets and close-knit neighborhoods, that he became the man his family cherished. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice in anger, never turned his back on those who needed him. In his mother's eyes, he had always been the one she could depend on. Carolyn Burton, a woman of deep faith and resilience, spoke of her son with pride, though now her words carried the weight of a grief no mother should ever endure. He was my rock, she had said, her voice steady despite the sorrow, the one who would call every morning just to check on me, the one who made sure I was okay, even when I knew he was the one carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His sister, Brittany Burton, described him in much the same way, a man of integrity, of quiet strength, a man who did not seek conflict, but rather worked to ease it. He was just that person, she had said. The one who would step in, the one who would make sure everybody was good before he even thought about himself. And yet, for all his devotion to those around him, nothing came close to the love he held for his children. There were four of them, 4 lives forever changed by the absence of the man who had once been their constant. He had never been the kind of father who merely provided, he was present. From scraped knees to whispered bedtime stories, from laughter-filled afternoons to the silent reassurance of his presence, he was there. His eldest daughter, a quiet but fiercely intelligent young girl, had always found comfort in the steadiness of her father. She had been there that night. She had seen it. The images burned into her mind, the sound of gunfire forever etched into the very fabric of her being. A moment she would never forget, no matter how many years passed. And then there were the younger ones, too young to fully understand the magnitude of what had been stolen from them. They would grow up with only memories, with the stories told by those who had loved their father. Tyrek had often spoken about his dreams for them. He wanted them to grow up knowing their worth, to understand that love was not just spoken, but shown. He wanted them to build futures free of the struggles he had once faced. He had worked tirelessly to make that dream a reality. It was for them that he had spent years building stability. It was for them that he had waited 13 years to make his love official. It was for them that he had promised to build a future filled with security, joy, and unwavering presence. And yet, in a matter of moments, that future was erased. The day began as all wedding days do, with anticipation. Excitement hung in the air, thick and full of promise. Tyrek Burton awoke to the knowledge that this day, October 12th, would be the one he had waited for. A day of love, of unity, of stepping into the next chapter of his life with the woman who had stood by his side for 13 years. For those in attendance, it was a time of celebration. The Barber Park Event Center in Greensboro, North Carolina, stood ready. A venue filled with warmth, with carefully placed decorations, each detail a reflection of the couple's journey. A gathering of family and friends, faces glowing with joy, voices filled with laughter. The bride, resplendent in white, walked the aisle toward the man she had long called her partner. But today she would call him something new, her husband. Tyrek stood waiting, his expression one of quiet pride, of overwhelming love. Vows were exchanged, promises made. The weight of 13 years lifted in a single moment, replaced by the certainty of forever. As the ceremony came to a close, the room erupted in applause. A lifetime together had begun. The reception followed, an extension of the joy that had filled the day. Music played softly at first, then louder, filling the space with rhythm, with movement, with life. Glasses clinked, toasts were raised, stories were shared. One guest, speaking later, would recall the way Tyrek held his wife's hand through it all, how he seemed to take in every detail, as if committing it to memory. He was just smiling, man. Just smiling the whole time. You could tell this was the happiest he'd ever been. A meal was served, plates filled and emptied, laughter spilling across the tables. Tyrek moved through the room, embracing family, shaking hands, his deep, familiar voice carrying over the music. His children were there, weaving through the celebration, dancing, laughing, caught in the magic of the evening. For hours the night stretched on, timeless, untouched. But time does not wait. The clock moved forward, as it always does. And as the final moments of the reception approached, guests began to gather their things. The music slowed, voices softened. The inevitable end of a perfect evening arrived. Tyrek and his wife stepped outside, the cool autumn air settling over the quieting streets. Their daughter followed closely behind, the lingering energy of the night still flickering in her steps. A few guests remained, standing in small groups, exchanging final words, lingering in the glow of the moment. One witness later recalled how nothing seemed amiss. They were just leaving, just like the rest of us, walking to the car, talking. There was nothing strange, nothing at all. Another guest, still inside the venue, remembered catching a final glimpse of the couple through the glass doors. He had his arm around her. That's the last thing I saw. His arm around her, walking away. They stepped toward their vehicle, the night embracing them in its quiet. It should have ended there. A drive home, the final few moments before beginning their new life together. A return to normalcy after a day of celebration. But the night had other plans. Somewhere, beyond the reach of the reception hall's soft lights, something was waiting. It was not fate. It was not coincidence. It was a meeting that should never have happened. And in mere moments, the joy of an entire day would be erased. The streets of Greensboro were quiet. A stillness had settled over the city, the hum of the day fading into the background as night took its place. Tyrek Burton, his wife, and his daughter sat in their vehicle, the last remnants of the evening's celebration still clinging to them. Laughter had not yet faded. Warmth still lingered. A family in transit heading home, the road stretched before them, empty and unassuming. Then, headlights. A vehicle approached, closing the distance between them. A stranger behind the wheel, a figure unknown to them. This was not a meeting of fate, not a collision of paths destined to cross. This was an accident of proximity, a mere moment in time that might have passed unnoticed, but it did not. What happened next is pieced together from witness accounts, from fragments of a night that should have ended without consequence. A brief encounter, a sudden stop. Tyrek's vehicle and the stranger's car, side by side, the air between them thick with something unspoken, a misunderstanding perhaps, a moment of hesitation, an assumption unmade, a pause, then words. No one will ever know the exact exchange, the precise cadence of the voices that filled the space between them, but witnesses recall the raised tones, the tension, the shift from quiet to something else entirely. The stranger stepped out, a figure now visible in the dim glow of passing streetlights. A man whose face Tyrek had never seen before. A man whose name he would never know. Tyrek, too, emerged. His presence was not one of aggression, not one of hostility. He was a father, a husband, a man who had spent his life resolving conflict, not engaging in it. But some tensions are not easily undone. The words continued, clipped, sharp, their meaning obscured by the space that stretched between life and death. A misunderstanding now feeding into something deeper. Tyrek's wife called to him, her voice a tether back to the world they had just left, the world of celebration, of love, of laughter. But here, in this moment, all of it was slipping away. The stranger's hand moved, a shift of motion, almost imperceptible in the darkness. 1 second, they were newlyweds. The next, a gun was raised. A weapon, cold and steady, leveled at the man who had, only hours ago, stood before his family and pledged a future of love and protection. Time slowed. Tyrek's daughter, still seated in the car, her small hands gripping the edges of her seat, her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. His wife, frozen, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest, rendering her unable to move, unable to speak, unable to comprehend the sudden and devastating shift in reality. A trigger, waiting, then the gunshot. A sound that cut through the quiet, sharp and unrelenting, a finality in its echo. Tyrek staggered, his body once steady, now betraying him, his hands reaching, grasping for something unseen. The pavement met him before he could catch himself. The world tilted. His wife screamed. His daughter, still too young to fully understand, could do nothing but watch. A second of silence, thick and heavy, before the air filled with movement, the sound of footsteps retreating. The stranger now fading into the darkness, his task complete, his presence no longer needed. No explanation, no remorse, just the absence of sound where a heartbeat once echoed. Tyrek lay still. The man who had built a life, who had waited 13 years for this very day, was gone before he could finish it. Carolyn Burton would later say, "He don't deserve what he got." His sister, Brittany Burton, her voice shaking, would say, "I don't understand how somebody that don't know somebody from a can of paint can just come in and just do that." His wife, standing there, her hands trembling, would say nothing at all, because there were no words left. Only grief. The night had fallen silent once more. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles cast long shadows against the pavement where Tyrek Burton lay. A space that had once held the echoes of laughter and love was now occupied by the weight of tragedy. Paramedics arrived first, their movements swift, voices urgent, but there was little they could do. Tyrek had taken his final breath. His new wife, now a widow, stood frozen in place. His daughter, eyes wide, hands clenched, had yet to move from the spot where she had witnessed everything. And somewhere in the darkness, the man responsible had vanished. The investigation begins. The Greensboro Police Department arrived, their radios crackling, their presence shifting the atmosphere. Officers stepped forward, assessing the scene, their expressions unreadable. The questions began. Who had fired the shot? Why had this happened? And most importantly, where was the suspect now? But the answers were not immediate. No weapon was found. No suspect remained at the scene. What had transpired had lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, a man's life had been taken. The first clues came from the witnesses. Stragglers from the wedding, those who had remained behind just long enough to hear the shot, to glimpse the fading taillights of a car disappearing into the night. They described a confrontation, brief, heated, escalating. A man, unknown to them, approaching Tyrek. Words exchanged. Then the gun, then the silence. But the details were incomplete. Who was this man? The suspect was described as a lone male driver, a man who had stopped, stepped out, and fired without hesitation. A man who had walked away from the scene of a killing without so much as a backward glance. But was this a deliberate act? A premeditated crime? Or had it been the result of something else, an encounter that had spiraled beyond control? The officers worked quickly. Road rage was a possibility. A minor disagreement, one that might have been dismissed on another day, had now resulted in the death of a newlywed father. But there were no immediate arrests. No suspect matching the description was found. The investigation expanded. Security cameras from nearby businesses were examined. Footage, grainy and indistinct, captured the fleeting outline of a vehicle. Headlights flaring, a figure moving, a moment frozen in time, yet the license plate remained unclear. the details obscured. Detectives reached out to the public, a call for information, a plea for witnesses. But the hours passed, then the days, and the man who had pulled the trigger remained free. A family's cry for justice. In the days that followed, grief gave way to something else: determination. Carolyn Burton, Tyrek's mother, had buried her son. She had held his children as they wept, had stood before cameras, her voice unwavering despite the weight of her loss. "I demand justice. I demand it, and I don't want to wait years for it," she said, her words cutting through the air with the force of a mother's agony. She had lost not just a son, but the man who had been her strength, and she would not rest until the man responsible was held accountable. Brittany Burton, his sister, spoke with anger, with disbelief. "I don't understand how somebody that don't know somebody from a can of paint can just do that." The pain was raw, the questions endless, and the answers nowhere to be found. The community responds. Word of the killing spread. It reached beyond Greensboro, beyond the quiet streets where Tyrek had spent his life. A father gunned down in front of his child, a man celebrating the happiest day of his life, now reduced to a headline. The outrage grew. Local activists began to speak. Community leaders called for action. The case could not fade, could not slip into the growing list of unsolved crimes. This was not simply about Tyrek Burton. It was about the violence that had taken him, about the man who had fired the shot, and about the justice that had yet to come. The search continues. The police investigation pressed forward. Leads were followed. Statements gathered. The identity of the shooter remained unknown, but the city itself had not forgotten. A mother still demanded justice. A daughter still carried the weight of what she had seen. And the streets of Greensboro still held the memory of the night a wedding became a tragedy. Violence is rarely sudden. It builds in moments, in decisions, in reactions that seem small, until they are not. A glance held too long, a word spoken too sharply, a misunderstanding left to fester. Tyrek Burton's death was unexpected, shocking, and seemingly without reason. A wedding night turned to tragedy by an encounter that lasted only seconds. But the question remains, why? What compels a person to take a life over something as fleeting as a moment on the road? Across the country, incidents of road rage violence have increased. According to recent data, more than 500 people are shot in road rage incidents each year in the United States. Many of these altercations begin with something trivial: a perceived slight, a honk, a lane change deemed too aggressive. But for some, these moments ignite something deeper, something uncontrollable. Experts in human behavior describe this as triggered aggression, a moment when frustration bypasses rational thought and becomes action. A dispute that should end with exchanged words or even averted gazes instead escalates to something irreversible. Was this what happened to Tyrek Burton? The suspect, a man still unidentified, stepped out of his vehicle that night with intent. A gun was raised without hesitation, a shot fired without apparent remorse. This was not an accident. But was it premeditated? Some believe the answer is no, that the gunman, whoever he was, had not planned to kill that night, but was instead caught in the heat of the moment, where emotion overpowered logic. A confrontation that grew beyond his control, his hand tightening on the weapon as anger turned to violence. Yet others question this conclusion. The shooter did not attempt to de-escalate. He did not yell or threaten before firing. He did not hesitate. Could it be that the gunman had already decided how this would end before the first word was even spoken? Or is there more to this story than meets the eye? Public opinion and social media reactions. News of Tyrek Burton's murder spread rapidly. In a matter of hours, his name was no longer just a name. It was a hashtag. On social media, debates erupted. How could a father of four, a newlywed, be gunned down so senselessly? Many were quick to point to a growing epidemic of gun violence and road rage, a society where confrontation too often turns deadly. One comment, repeated by hundreds, stood out. We are living in a world where people would rather pull a trigger than let something go. Others focused on the suspect himself, still unidentified, still free. How does a man kill someone in front of a child and disappear like nothing happened? Among the voices of outrage, there were those who speculated. Could there have been another motive? Conspiracy theories and unanswered questions. Was this truly a random encounter, or was there something more beneath the surface? Some questioned whether Tyrek had been targeted, a man with no known enemies, a father who avoided conflict, a groom who had just begun a new chapter in life. Was it possible that this wasn't about road rage at all? There were no known threats against him, no warnings, no reason for anyone to seek him out that night. But coincidence alone did not seem enough to explain the cold efficiency of the killing. Could the shooter have known who Tyrek was? Or was it simply a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong man? For Tyrek Burton's family, the questions only deepen the pain. Carolyn Burton, his mother, has made it clear, "I demand justice. I demand it, and I don't want to wait years for it." But justice remains elusive. The suspect is still out there, and the truth behind what really happened that night remains just out of reach. The world does not pause for grief. The sun rises as it always has. Cars fill the streets as they did the day before, and people move forward, carrying on with lives that remain untouched. But for one family in Greensboro, North Carolina, time has splintered. The moment the gunshot rang out, a line was drawn, before and after. Before, Tyrek Burton was a father, a husband, a man filled with hope for the future. After, he was a name in a police report, a statistic in a growing crisis of gun violence. His wedding day, once meant to be a beginning, was now an ending, and the man responsible, still free. Justice in cases like these is often slow. But how long must a family wait? The investigation continues. Detectives pore over security footage, analyzing grainy images, searching for a detail, a shape, a movement, anything that might reveal the identity of the killer. Witnesses have come forward, their statements giving only fragments of the truth. Yet the suspect remains unnamed, unseen, untouched by the weight of what he has done. The question lingers, will he be found? And if he is, what will justice look like for a mother who has lost her son, for a wife who became a widow in a single instant, for children who will never again feel the steady embrace of their father? These are not abstract questions. They are the reality for the Burton family, for the community that mourns alongside them, for every person who now drives the streets of Greensboro with the knowledge that a man willing to kill over a moment of anger is still out there. And so, we turn to you. Do you believe the killer will be caught? What's your take on road rage crimes escalating to murder? Are we becoming a society where a single moment of frustration can lead to an irreversible act of violence? Let us know in the comments, because these discussions matter, because the voices of those left behind should never fade into silence. Tyrek Burton waited 13 years to marry the love of his life, but his story ended in just 7 hours. Will justice be served? Only time will tell.